Addiction is truly a disease of the brain. MRI technology, magnetic resonance imaging of the brain, has detected extra oxygen consumption when involved in seeking reward. In this experiment, extra oxygen flow was found in young adults and adolescents who anticipated pleasure pressing a button to win money. The central nervous system is composed of both the brain and the spinal cord. The brain has an area of vision, which is the hindbrain, the occipital lobe. It has an area in the cortex that is in charge of movement and sensation, and the frontal area where judgment and abstract thought. The midbrain, which is the reward mechanism, produces neurotransmitters and hormones, while the hindbrain receives pain and registers memory. The pathway for sensation of pain and the reaction to pain goes up the spinal cord through the midbrain to the cortex, where motor orders are relayed back down to respond. Neurons are electrically stimulated through a cell body, which is the soma, dendrites, which are the receptive terminal, and axons, which are the motor activating terminals. The impulse flow goes through these axons and dendrites from soma to soma, transmitting and relaying messages. But between the dendrite and the axon, there is a synaptic space where neurotransmitters are picked up by specific receptors. Here we have a picture of the dopamine neurotransmitter as it binds to dopamine receptors. These are modulated by endorphin, which is the opiate produced by the body. There are natural reward systems such as food, water, sex, nurturing that follow the reward pathway. This goes through the VTA, which is the ventral tegmental area, the nucleus accumbens, and the prefrontal cortex. The discovery of this reward pathway was achieved with the help of animals that were jolted through electrodes in specific places. The electrode was placed in the nucleus accumbens, and the rat kept pressing a lever to receive small electrical stimuli that were pleasurable, a state in which the organism engages in compulsive behavior is addiction. When a person injects heroin or morphine, the drug travels quickly to the brain through the bloodstream. Once in the brain, the heroin is converted to morphine by enzymes, and these follow the VTA, nucleus accumbens, and the prefrontal reward pathway. This is a close-up view of a synapse in the nucleus accumbens, and we see the three types of neurons that participate in opiate action. One that releases dopamine, another one that contains the neurotransmitter, and the last postsynaptic receptor. Tolerance is a state in which an organism no longer responds to a drug. The development of tolerance to analgesic effects of morphine involves different areas of the brain, separate from those in the reward pathway. Two areas are involved: the thalamus and the spinal cord. So there are two ways of responding to stimulus. One causes dependence. It is the state in which an organism functions normally only in the presence of a drug. Dependence to morphine involves specific areas of the brain that go from the midbrain up to the reward pathway in the frontal cortex. Many of the withdrawal symptoms from heroin or morphine are generated when the opiate receptors in the thalamus and brainstem are deprived of morphine. Dependence to heroin and opiates follow these two mechanisms, the reward pathway and the thalamus brainstem. Thus, it is possible to be dependent on morphine and create an addiction, while others being treated for chronic disease may use morphine for pain and not develop a compulsive addiction. Historically, cocaine abuse involved snorting powder. When cocaine was processed to form the free base, it is now smoked. Smoking bypasses cocaine from the lungs directly to the heart and up to the brain. The faster a drug with addictive liability reaches the brain, the more likely it is to be abused. When a person smokes or snorts cocaine, it reaches all the areas of the brain, but it binds to specific sites in the VTA, the nucleus accumbens, and the prefrontal area. Dopamine inside the terminal is released into the synaptic space and binds to specific receptors. When cocaine is present, it binds to the uptake pumps and prevents them from transporting dopamine back into the neuron terminal. So more dopamine builds up in the synaptic space and is free to activate more dopamine receptors. The repeated use of cocaine makes the body rely on this drug to maintain rewarding feeling. Scientists have measured increased dopamine levels in the synapses of reward pathways in the rats that self-administered cocaine. Just as they did for heroin, rats will press a bar to receive injections of cocaine directly into the areas of the reward pathway. Heroin and cocaine activate the reward pathway. Other drugs such as nicotine and alcohol activate this pathway as well, but each drug has a different mechanism. Thus, addiction is truly a disease of the brain. Addictions are attaining epidemic proportions in our world today. Alcohol is now part of everyday celebrations, including baptisms, weddings, graduations, and students are becoming obsessed with the idea of alcohol. Now, this disease is chronic, it is progressive, and it is lethal. The impact on the brain may lead to death. It is important to realize that the human organism responds in two ways. One is through the sympathetic nervous system, and the other is through the parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system responds exciting. The parasympathetic nervous system responds inhibiting. Both, if taken to extremes, will lead to death. Now, it is very interesting to see that the anticipation of pleasure in the brain is located along a specific pathway in the midbrain. It applies to pleasure, either sexual, through food, alcohol, or other drugs. Knowing this will help us teach our students to prevent the risk of addictions.